Hi there, welcome back after a week's gap because of doing 2 weeks worth of harvest services. We're back on our series on Philippians this week, Paul's favourite church. Although I'm afraid there will be another gap next week because next week I am due a week's leave. Anyway, we're into the second part of Philippians chapter 2 now, and this week we're reading Philippians 2, verses 12 to 30. Here's what Paul says. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault, in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labour in vain. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you, and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I'm all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. So then, welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honour people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. I've talked before about how my late father was an amateur astronomer, and how he shared his love of the subject with me when I was a child. I never picked up his level of interest, but he was understandably proud of one of my sister's boys who went on to study astrophysics as part of his first degree. But I still have fond memories of gazing up into a clear night sky with him while he pointed out various constellations and the names of the stars. When my daughter as a teenager started asking me the same questions when we were walking home at night from her youth club, I installed an app on my phone that we could point to the sky and it would show us what all the stars and constellations were. And recently my wife has been noticing these heavenly objects when we have been out on late night dog walks. So for her birthday, I bought her a planisphere, a printed resource that helps you identify the planets and the stars. I still get a thrill and a poignant memory when I look up and I see Orion or the Plough. I often think of Psalm 8 and get a sense of wonder and even of worship. The psalmist says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them?" In today's passage, Paul doesn't call us to gaze in wonder at the stars, but figuratively to emulate them. He says, "Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky." In the world, our calling is to shine like stars in a dark sky. We are to be those points of light in the darkness. Rather than just moan about all the darkness around us, we get on with shining the light of Christ. We do this, says Paul, under his call, God's call to continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it's God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. You see, God has saved us for a purpose. He has made us new. Now we live out that newness of life, but not on our own, because God is at work in us to make it possible. And this will make us like shining stars in the darkness of the world. So what qualities does Paul say will enable the Philippians to shine like stars in their dark world? I think we'll find that things haven't changed that much. The first of three general qualities here is kindness. So in verses 14 and 15, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Well, that should be a shoo-in, shouldn't it? Don't grumble or argue. Unfortunately, it isn't in some churches. It's more widespread than some of us would like to believe, especially when we are always telling ourselves that our churches are friendly and welcoming. Now, I freely admit that as a minister, I am sensitive to this one, because we church leaders are often the target of the grumbling when people don't like what we do or what we don't do. You may know the old joke where the question is, what's the favourite Sunday lunch in a Christian household? And the answer is roast preacher. And I also know that some of this grumbling comes our way, because in these days of declining and aging congregations, people pin massive hopes on a new minister being the one who will turn around the losses. Which is why at one previous circuit welcome service, I quoted the famous line from Monty Python's Life of Brian, "He's not the Messiah, he's just a very naughty boy." The job of Messiah was taken 2,000 years ago. I'm also sensitive to this, though, not for the barbs thrown at people like me, but because in my position I hear the stories of those who have left a church, having been wounded by cruel words and actions. Do you know the damage caused by a harsh word in church? But more positively, did you notice just how highly Paul rates the idea of avoiding grumbling and arguing? He says it contributes to us being blameless and pure. So often when we think about what makes us blameless and pure, we think about the avoidance of certain big sins, not least those involving sexual impurity. And I'm certainly not denying that these things are important. But here, Paul says that if we want to be blameless and pure, children of God without fault, in a warped and crooked generation, then saying no to grumbling and arguing in the church is also part of this. And doing this also makes us shine. We become without fault in a warped and crooked generation. A Christian community, kindness over harshness will stand out in society. Indeed, we will shine like stars in a dark sky. When we are among our friends outside the church, can we truly say that the congregation we belong to is such a wonderful place of kindness and care, where people are not ripped apart by the words of others, but rather are built up? Wouldn't it be great if our churches were known in their communities as the places where people receive kindness? Secondly, faithfulness. End of verse 15, beginning of verse 16. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. Faithfulness to the gospel. Hold firmly to the word of life. This isn't just an internal thing in the church, by the way, it's also outward facing, since it can also be translated hold out the word of life. In the church and in the world, we are called to hold faithfully to the gospel, because that will make us shine like stars in the dark sky. For too long now, we have heard church leaders say that we should adapt our message to the society we live in, because parts of it are unacceptable intellectually today. But the moment we just make Christianity like a religious version of the wider culture, then there's no longer any reason to join the church. Why join something that is just like how you already are anyway? There's no point. No, the only hope for the church to be like shining stars in the dark sky is if we keep to the gospel, even and especially where it differs from the culture in which we live. And if you don't believe me, then listen to the respected historian Tom Holland. He has been on quite a journey in his thinking and in his life. In 2016, he wrote, "It took me a long time to realize my morals are not Greek or Roman, but thoroughly and proudly Christian." He realized that we owe the good things in our society to our Christian foundations, and he began an excursion into the image of Christianity. Recently, he has publicly urged churches to keep Christianity weird and to preach the weird stuff. All those crucial values we cherish actually have their basis in the weird stuff of Christianity, like the miraculous, not least the resurrection, ascension, and second coming of Jesus. The church leaders and members who trumpet how the resurrection is just a way of saying someone stays in our memory, or that the ascension is a fairy tale, and that the second coming is science fiction, are not doing the church any good at all. In fact, they are doing the church a grave disservice. They are removing all power from the gospel and leaving it like a limp lettuce sheet. If anyone comes into your church's pulpit and starts preaching this stuff, do not just dismiss it and say, oh, it's interesting to hear diverse opinions, or let's live with contradictory convictions. No. See them for what they are. Wolves in sheep's clothing. Let's stay faithful to the gospel in all its weirdness. That's where the power of Jesus transforms lives. Kindness, faithfulness, thirdly and finally, service. Here I'm thinking of what Paul says at the end of the reading about Timothy and Epaphroditus. Although he does speak of the Philippians serving. Paul says that Timothy will be concerned for the Philippians' welfare, that he doesn't spend his time on his own interests, and he has a track record of serving. Epaphroditus, who doesn't enjoy good health, has almost died for the gospel and risked his life to help Paul. You see, it's not enough just to be nice, which might be what you would think had Paul stopped after his admonition to avoid grumbling and arguing. A faith based on Jesus, who suffered and died on the cross, cannot be reduced to niceness. Timothy and Epaphroditus, with their modelling of selflessness and sacrifice, show such a faith in action. People like Timothy and Epaphroditus are true Christian heroes. These are the kind of people we rightly celebrate. We write books about them. We use them as sermon illustrations. They are exceptional. But why are they exceptional? Isn't their example simply what should be the Christian norm? Aren't their lives of service, sacrificing and risk-taking the natural consequences of Jesus' teaching and example? And if they are, then why aren't more of us like him and like them? Is it that it's easier and more comfortable to opt for niceness rather than sacrificial servanthood? Have we so bought into gentle Jesus, meek and mild, that has sort of rubbed out the rest of the stuff about Jesus? Are we keen to scoop up the blessings of faith while not taking on the responsibilities and the challenges? I mean, Jesus certainly shone like a star in the dark sky, and so we work out our own salvation that is going to involve beginning to imitate him. That's what Timothy and Epaphroditus did. They found ways to imitate Christ, and in doing so, they shone brightly. So I wonder in what ways Jesus is calling us to imitate him. Who are we being called to serve, as Timothy did? For whom are we being called to take risks, as Epaphroditus did? And let's remember that both of these men had their frailties. We read explicitly here that Epaphroditus had his health issues. We read in other New Testament epistles that Timothy was timid. These were not people who were somehow genetically wired to be heroes. They had the same imperfections and weaknesses that we have. I mean, much as we might like to believe otherwise, the New Testament doesn't have two categories of Christians. The ordinary ones, for whom a fairly modest standard of lifestyle is required, and the keen ones, who are held to higher standards and in whose reflected glory we can bask. Jesus never made divisions like that. The call to kindness, to faithfulness to the gospel, and to sacrificial service, that call is for all of us. Do we want to shine like stars in the dark sky? Or do we want our light to be snuffed out? And that's the challenge I'll leave with you. And I'm hoping with my week off next week, that's plenty for you to think about over the next 2 weeks before we come back and begin Philippians chapter 3. Until then, goodbye and God bless you.